On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and directors. In this week's On Story, a conversation with Masters of Horror creator Mick Garris, 30 Days of Night creator Steve Niles, Twilight Zone's Penn Densham, Battleship writer Eric Hober, and Final Destination 5 screenwriter Eric Heiserer. This episode, our panelists discuss the elemental tools of great horror films.
You know, I thought about it a lot when we were doing Fear itself, because we were trying to encompass as many different branches of what that means. And horror is very personal, but what's personal to me is probably something you share. Anything that we're afraid of, in a very basic sense, horror can be just something repellent. But to me, it's deeper than that. It's emotional. It's something that affects you more than intellectually. It's a visceral response to something that provokes fear. Or revulsion, which is the simpler horror.
I've always loved the comparison between horror and comedy, because they both require the same thing. They both require surprise,
And a physical reaction.
And a physical reaction. One you can't control.
Horror is necessary. When I was really small, like 5 or 6, watching a thing called Quatermass in the Pit, it was one of the best horror stories I've ever seen in my life. There's a part of London, they're excavating for a new subway, they discover what they think is an unexploded bomb. There are all kinds of weird phenomena happening around it. The name of the road the bomb on is actually a nickname for the devil, and they uncover it and it's a spaceship. And inside the spaceship were things that look like devils.
The demons.
Watching each week, and I am just so absorbed and scared. That was my beginning. Fairy tales have never gone away. Children being baked in cookies and eaten, or monsters pulling them apart, or, this is part of growing up. And that it starts when daddy and mommy can't kiss it better anymore.
The most effective horror to me is an emotional, visceral response, not just an eek or a jump out of your seat. John Carpenter once said that I can make you jump. It's really easy. I can run black leader through a projector and have one white frame and a loud noise, and it'll make you jump. But you're not going to take that home with you after the final credits roll. If you can affect someone and make them feel something really deep and be in touch with a fear that's personal to them and confront them with that, it's actually really good for you, too. I'm here to say that horror is
just like comedy.
Beneficial. Yeah.
For me, it's all about trying to make it, really personal and relatable. It allows us to experience, what these characters are experiencing and to go through the catharsis, but safely. And I think the degree to which, you make it relatable puts you right there. And that's really so important in terms of the experience that it has on you.
I caught this movie late at night when my folks were out of town called The Changeling with George C. Scott. And it drew me in a way that so many of the other horror movies that I've been exposed to, slasher or otherwise, really couldn't. And that it wasn't a case of me rooting for the villain to kill off the characters that were there. It was a case of like a mystery and a very emotional story and sort of a broken main character. It was because I had such an emotional attachment to the characters in the story and that I wanted to learn the mystery that I found like I had to continue to watch horror, and I sort of had a love affair with horror ever since.
It's a great film, and it uses its space amazingly well. George C. Scott goes through the agony of losing a child, and the impact of that film is so great because here's this home he's trying to start his life over again after this tremendous loss. And that loss, the loss of a child in this house previously, is still there, and it's obvious, and the traces of that just hurt. They really hurt. And everywhere you look, there's vast open space and dust, and it's an old house. Well, good horror is also good drama. You know, it's easier in a lot of ways to make a good drama than it is to make a good horror movie. But to tell a good story that's engaging with interesting characters is your first raison d'etre. And then instilling the suspense and terror and fear on top of that makes it doubly difficult.
You know, and the best horror movies are the ones that tell, you know, really complicated and interesting stories, sort of aside from the horror. Think about The Others or a movie like that. I mean, there is a thing about children, you know, in horror because, you know, they sort of represent all this innocence and this, you know, this being able to see the world for what it really is.
They're everywhere. They say this house is theirs. And they say they're going to take the curtains down as well.
Look, what's at the basis of all horror, classic or contemporary, is fear. And it's fears that we share. It's about the fear of either ourselves or our loved ones or people we care about being hurt or dying before their time. It's the fear of death. It's all about, we experience life and every one of us fears where it's going to go. It's about pain. You know, nobody wants to hurt, whether it's physical or emotional pain. To me, when you combine them, that's the most potent source of fear. We're still using techniques from the 1930s, from the Universal movies, in creating fear with sounds and, you know, a shadow moving across something. That was invented by the movies, you know, and it becomes iconographic, you know, when it's put to use today in modern terms. So, yeah, that toolbox, all of those things from sound and image and lens and performance. One of the things I did in The Stand, there's a scene in the book, it's all done in darkness because somebody has to go through a crowded Lincoln tunnel that's jammed with cars, and they're all filled with people who died from the superflu. I'm shooting it. I can't do it all in black. It would have been easy and cheap to do. I just run black leader and we do sound effects. But the fear on the actor really carries through. You identify with the actor, and that, you know, is constantly getting his reaction and feeling that reaction. And the way we decided to light it was, you know, some of the cars still had their headlights on, and they're getting dimmer and dimmer as the scene takes place. Some of them have signal lights on that are getting dimmer and dimmer, and as you approach them, you know, the light can die and various things like that. Just how do you use those tools to illustrate something in a book that all takes place in black and scares the shit out of you?
There are certain tools in the horror director's toolbox that won't fit elsewhere. They were setting up for this shot, and the DP and the director were talking back and forth, and the DP was saying basically, well, if we want to, you're saying to try and do all of this information all in one long shot, or in a locked off, you know, camera, and the longer we spend there, the more uneasy your audience is going to get. So we should probably cut away to coverage at this point in time. And I was over in the corner going, oh wait, uneasy? That's exactly what you want. And of course, it's already been done. Like there's a scene in Exorcist 3 in the hospital where it's just this one sort of like down the long hall, and it just plays forever and ever and ever. And the further you go in, the more you're like, what's going to happen? Why are we still here? Someone's going to die. And then, you know, and sure enough, there's a great, you know, scary moment at the end of that.
William Peter Blatty, who wrote the Exorcist book and screenplay and produced the movie, is a very devout Catholic. So I'm sure that that was something he felt was going to spread his message, and it did. A hell of a lot of people went back to church after they saw The Exorcist.
It's true.
It's true. Well, so much of cinema history and the language of cinema was discovered in genre films because you not only can stretch the boundaries, but you're expected to go beyond the norm. And you can be experimental in filmmaking styles, in creating mood, you know, those fantastic impressionist sets that started in Germany and at the UFA productions of Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and those films. They were inventing things because they didn't have the wherewithal, they didn't have the financial or the space to create these worlds. They did it in a very abstract manner, and that abstract became part of the language of fear. You know, from Buñuel and Dali doing Un Chien Andalou, the horrific images of this great silent film, the original Frankenstein, these were impressionist films. Just like impressionistic painting is not about the details, you know, the representing everything in art perfectly, photographically, but creating the impression of it, you know, creating the impression of death through exaggerated, twisted trees that are barren of leaves and things like that, you know, making a jagged road that looks like it goes on forever, but it's really a forced perspective painting. You know, not necessarily relying on reality, but bending reality in a way that has an emotional impact on the viewer, on the audience.
The monsters sell. Actually, if you look at it, the backdrop paintings, and there's some shots where Karloff's actually leaning into it, you realize there is no, that's a painting on the wall made to look like it's going crooked, backwards.
And the graveyard.
The graveyard.
You can see the wrinkles in the cyc behind them, you know. And here's a graveyard, and there's a skeleton in a hood on a shovel like this. Every graveyard I've gone to looks like that, you know. And these, you know, mangled-looking trees. It's atmosphere. It's something that you can draw attention to it, but it's even better if it's background. The drama is playing before this surreal background that affects you back here rather than up here.
Yeah.
Hitchcock's great example when he was shooting a scene for, was it Saboteur, I think, was that I could shock you by being on a subway and having a bomb suddenly blow up and you had no idea it was going to happen. That shock will last moments. Or I could put a bomb under the table and keep cutting to it while everyone's talking about something very mundane around this table, and none of them know, but you in the audience know, because there's a bomb under the table, and he just stretches it out. That's suspense.
I found that suspense works as a seduction. In that, you know, the more suspenseful, it's more like foreplay that you're playing with your reader, in that you're not giving the scare right away, but you're hinting at a scare that's to come. In Final Destination 5, I can't believe I'm saying an example from that movie, but when I designed the sequence in the gymnasium for the gymnast, I introduced, basically, I put several different weapons on the table, as it were. You know, I said here's the exposed wire and the water leaning toward that. Here's the, you know, the rusted nail on the balance beam. Here's this other problem, the air conditioning. I gave out like several suspects. The very first time they saw like the exposed wire, everybody in the audience groaned, like, "Oh, come on, really? This is." And then we got past that, and everyone was like, "Oh, what's it? Oh, I got it. Is that? Oh, no, it's not that either." And it kept sort of like defying their expectations to the point that when they finally sort of like, you know, she finally died in a terrible, terrible way. Thank you, Steve Quayle. That it was a kind of a very cathartic release for them. And we, in fact, had to change that movie and postpone dialogue in the next scene by a good 20 seconds because everybody was laughing so much from finally having gotten to the end of the sequence that they missed dialogue that was important to the movie. So.
Hello. Hello, my name is Lynne Vincent McCarthy, and I am the writer and director of the short thriller STRANGEFACE. The idea basically came from a feature that I'm developing. The feature is about a very odd and quite isolated young woman whose main intimate relationship is with an old dog. It's a thriller, so I really wanted to retain a sense of darkness in the ending, but also give a sense of hope if that was what the audience wanted. I think the most memorable moment was actually a very quiet, personal moment. I suddenly looked around and realised that I was exactly where I wanted to be, and I'd waited to direct a film for a long time. It was a really nice feeling to think, yeah, I really like being here and want to get back in and do it again as soon as I can. Coming up is my short thriller STRANGEFACE, which I really enjoyed making, and I hope that you enjoy watching it.
Come on. Just ignore her.
you little... Likes you. You got a dog at home? You want him? What are you going to give me in return for him? Nothing? Not your lucky day, mate. Seriously, kid, you should leave me alone. Go home. Go on, get out of here, you little freak!
Under the morning sun, I am not alone. You are the morning sun. You are my way. You are my way. Now that I walk with you, the hollow, heavy load This love has let me grow. This love has let me go. I will light your way. You will light my way. By your side, I will stay. I will stay.
On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival. A look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and directors. In this week's On Story, screenwriters Mick Garris, Penn Densham, Eric Hober, Eric Heiserer, and Steve Niles discuss the elemental tools of great horror cinema, followed by Lynne Vincent McCarthy's haunting short film, Strangeface.